Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on Human Services. My name is Terry Jensen, and I am the committee chair this afternoon. Introducing the rest of the committee is Mr. Mohammed Fayaz, Mr. Marv Friesen, Mr. Joe Hargrave, Mr. Warren Kading, Mr. Hugh Nerleen, and substituting this afternoon for Ms. Mira Conway is Ms. Jennifer Bowes. I would like to table the following document, HUS 22-29, Office of the Saskatchewan Information and Privacy Commissioner correspondence regarding Bill 101 dated April 4th, 2023. Today, the committee will be considering the estimates for the Ministry of Advanced Education, followed by consideration of Bills 129 and 103. We will first consider votes 37 and 169, covering the estimates, supplementary estimates number 2, and lending and investing activities estimates for the Ministry of Advanced Education. We will now begin with consideration of vote 37, Advanced Education, Central Management and Services, subvote AE01. Minister Wyant is here with his officials. I would ask that officials please state their names before speaking at the microphone the first time. As a reminder, please don't touch the microphones. The Hansard operator will turn your microphone on when you are speaking to the committee. Minister Wyant, please introduce your officials and make your opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to speak about the Ministry of Advanced Education's 2023-24 budget. I'm joined to my right by my Deputy Minister, Denise Maxa, and my Chief of Staff, Michelle Lang, who's sitting behind me. Also here from the Ministry are David Boehm, Assistant Deputy Minister, Mark Wyatt, Assistant Deputy Minister, Corrine Barnett, Executive Director of Corporate Finance, Kurt Wasminity, Executive Director of Student Services and Support Services, Lindell Veach, Executive Director of Strategy, Planning and Sector Engagement, Mike Pestle, Executive Director of Sector Management and Relations, and Jill Zimmer, Executive Director of International Education and Jurisdictional Initiatives, and Cynthia Barbour, Director of Learning Pathways. Mr. Chair, the Ministry of Advanced Education is focused on supporting an accessible, responsive, sustainable, and accountable post-secondary sector. Our goal is to ensure that our post-secondary institutions deliver the high-quality education that our students deserve. All partners, including government, play a role in supporting students and preparing them for rewarding careers right here in Saskatchewan. We know that an educated, innovative workforce will help meet the needs of our residents and our economy, and it's essential to our province's future. Supporting our post-secondary students encourages growth that works for everyone. Ultimately, it will help us achieve the goals in Saskatchewan's growth plan. The Ministry of Advanced Education's 23-24 budget provides strong support for post-secondary students and institutions. We're investing $764.8 million to strengthen post-secondary education, which is an increase of $24.5 million or 3.3%. This investment will expand training programs, fund priority infrastructure projects, and support students financially. I want to emphasize that behind the many investments and initiatives in this ministry's budget, there's a clear purpose: keep our young people here at home. Give them appealing opportunities to train and then to work close to where they live. Help them find and pursue their careers of choice right here in Saskatchewan. We must pay particular attention to engaging and supporting Indigenous learners. At the same time, we also need to attract and retain bright, innovative newcomers to enrich our labor force and contribute to our economy. By doing all that, we will support a bright future for our province. So first, I'd like to talk about some key highlights in the budget. The ministry is playing a major role in supporting Saskatchewan's Health Human Resource Action Plan. The plan includes 4 pillars: recruit, train, incentivize, and retain. And the Ministries of Advanced Education is focused on the training goals that are outlined in the plan. This year's ministry's budget includes $25.2 million in new funding to expand training programs for key health professionals. To help meet critical labor needs, approximately 550 seats will begin to be added this fall across 18 health training programs. This investment is over and above the $5.5 million commitment that we announced in January. It's already helping post-secondary institutions prepare for a significant expansion. We are determined to give students more opportunities to prepare for and pursue rewarding careers in high-demand health sector occupations. In terms of numbers, The most significant seat increases are in training programs for primary care paramedics, pharmacy technicians, continuing care assistants, and licensed practical nurses. Among other priority occupations including this expansion are mental health and addictions counselors, clinical psychologists, and physical therapists. The scale of this training expansion is significant and ambitious. Because it covers a wide range of health programs, it requires support from our universities and our technical schools and many of our regional colleges. And because Saskatchewan's health sector cannot work in isolation, the work also means collaboration with other provinces. Some of the new seats for Saskatchewan students will be in highly specialized programs in Alberta and British Columbia, which are not offered here in Saskatchewan. These interprovincial agreement programs, IPAs, will help us meet the need for more specialized health professionals. They include programs for respiratory therapists, magnetic resonance imaging technologists, and occupational therapists. I'm very pleased that seats will be reserved for Saskatchewan students in 2 new IPA programs starting this fall. Speech-language pathology offered through the University of Alberta, and environmental public health offered through British Columbia Institute of Technology. Students do go out of province for this training, but all of the clinical placements for these programs will be completed here in Saskatchewan. This will help connect students to our labor market and support our efforts to convince graduates to make their permanent homes here in our province. While negotiation with our partners in Alberta and British Columbia continue on these agreements, the Ministry of Advanced Education's budget includes up to $5 million this year to reserve a total of 153 seats for Saskatchewan learners in 10 specialized health professions. The 23-24 budget also includes $10 million in operating and capital funding to continue the 150-seat expansion in nursing programs, which was announced last year. This funding is over and above the Health Human Resource Training seat expansion investment. Nurses are the heart of our health system. This funding will support our nursing workforce by training more registered nurses, registered psychiatric nurses, and nurse practitioners. An additional $2.4 million will be used to support internationally educated health care providers to successfully transition to the Saskatchewan workforce. In particular, the funding will help cover costs associated with the delivery of Saskatchewan Polytechnic's bridging program for international students. Saskatchewan needs more internationally educated healthcare providers, whether already here or abroad, to help us meet residents' healthcare needs now and in the years to come. We encourage these international professionals to choose to live and work in this province. Saskatchewan also needs physicians. Government has invested heavily in USask College of Medicine to ensure the province has an accredited, successful medical school. The College of Medicine will receive $42.3 million from the ministry this year. This funding includes $200,000 to begin planning for a potential physician assistance program. I will point out that this is advanced education's funding only. The Ministry of Health also provides significant funding to the college. All of these investments are critical to meet our need for health professionals, ensure that our new health facilities will be appropriately staffed, and continue the post-pandemic recovery of our health system. I want to recognize the vital role of our post-secondary education partners in addressing the health human resources needs of our province. Their commitment and level of engagement has been incredible. I sincerely thank all the institutions involved in helping us expand training opportunities in health programs. The Ministry of Advanced Education continues to work closely with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training on strategies to recruit, train, incentivize, and retain healthcare workers. Mr. Chair, this year, the budget recognizes another critical training need in our province, the rising demand for veterinary services. We are providing $12.55 million to the Western College of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan. Of that investment, $539,000 will fund 5 new veterinary training seats at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine. Starting this fall, there will be 25 seats available to Saskatchewan students at the college, which is up from 20 seats. Saskatchewan Polytechnic will also receive $340,000 in ongoing annual funding to support its 2-year veterinary technologist program. The program is offered through distance delivery, so it's more easily accessible to students in rural Saskatchewan. Veterinary services are in high demand here and across Canada. We continue to work with our partners in the agriculture sector to address this need with a particular focus on encouraging students to choose rural and large animal practice. Those are some of the key areas of focus in this year's budget. Mr. Chair, I'll now move on to institutional funding details. The 23-24 budget represents the third year of a 4-year funding agreement between our government and post-secondary institutions. This agreement has provided funding predictability as requested and supported by our partner institutions. A one-time $60 million investment over the past 2 years has helped post-secondary institutions weather the challenges of the pandemic and to take concrete steps to improve their financial sustainability. Under the agreement, operating funding will remain stable over the next 2 years. Institutions continue to focus on shared priorities. These include generating new sources of revenue and investing in operational efficiencies that result in long-term savings, finding new innovative ways to work with other post-secondary institutions, achieving post-secondary priorities that are set out in Saskatchewan's growth plan, and pandemic recovery and post-pandemic evolution of programs and operations. Institutions have reported on results of the initiatives that are underway. Their reporting shows that our $60 million investment has supported 134 unique initiatives to address the priority areas I've just mentioned. Post-secondary institutions are using the funding primarily for revenue-generating activities. 44% of the projects are in this area. Projects include efforts to increase domestic and international enrollment, offering new programming like micro-credentialing, and invest in enhanced fundraising activities. Of the remaining projects, 22% focus on pandemic recovery, programming, and operational transitions. 15% support expense reduction. 10% support academic and administrative innovations, and 9% promote collaboration among institutions. And I appreciate the willingness of all our partners to work together to ensure that we provide our students with the best possible post-secondary education. I would now like to provide some details on base funding for our post-secondary institutions. The budget includes $697.4 million in operating grants for post-secondary institutions. We're providing $431.8 million to the University of Saskatchewan, the University of Regina, and federated and affiliated colleges. $171.1 million will go to Saskatchewan Polytechnic, the Saskatchewan Institute of Technologies, and the Dumont Technical Institute. $35.6 million will be invested in our regional colleges. This is in addition to the $26.3 million they will receive this year from the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training. Included in funding for regional colleges is $1.9 million to continue implementing a comprehensive higher education enterprise resource planning system. It will support current and future business requirements, such as a student information system and financial and human resource components to meet student and institutional needs. I will note that since 2007, our government has increased operating funding to our universities by 37%. In relation to comparable universities, both Saskatchewan universities are in the top 50% in terms of operating funding received from government, and that's according to Statistics Canada. The roles played by our technical institutes and regional colleges in the post-secondary education sector is also vitally important and is reflected in their funding allocation for this year. Base operating grants for technical and Indigenous institutions and regional colleges remain stable this year. Additional funding of $9.1 million will support expansion of health training programs at these institutions. In the case of Saskatchewan Polytechnic, this funding also supports continuation of the nursing seat expansion. Mr. Chair, the budget also invests $58.9 million in capital projects and preventative maintenance and renewal across the post-secondary sector. This is a 90% increase in the ministry's capital budget. It reflects several priorities in addition to health training expansion. $8.7 million for an electrical infrastructure upgrade project at the University of Saskatchewan, $6 million for design and planning work for Saskatchewan's Polytechnic Saskatoon campus renewal project, $4 million for renovations at the University of Saskatchewan's dental clinic, $800,000 to expand Carlton Trails Technical Learning and Trades facility, and $600,000 for a new shop at Northlands College to consolidate building operations and increase student learning space. I'd like to specifically highlight the funding for Sask Polytechnic's Saskatoon campus renewal project. Saskatchewan Polytechnic currently delivers programming at 11 different buildings in 6 locations across Saskatoon. This project would consolidate most of these programs into one location, which is yet to be finalized. This year's funding will advance planning and design work. The project has great potential to increase enrollment, reduce dependence on leased space, improve student access to services, and provide modern, flexible training spaces. It's a visionary and exciting project. We look forward to the completion of due diligence and to the submission of a proposal for government approval. Also on the capital front, Parkland College is receiving funding this year to reopen a provincial firefighting training program in Melville. I'm very pleased that starting in July, Saskatchewan residents will once again be able to train and become firefighters in their home province. This is a collaborative effort that also involves the Saskatchewan Public Safety Agency and the Ministry of Immigration and Career Training. The Ministry of Advanced Education is contributing $210,000 in funding for fixed capital assets as part of the government's total investment of $1.8 million. The 23-24 budget provides strong financial support to our post-secondary students by investing $46.6 million for student loans and scholarships. The budget will increase by 24% over last year due to growing utilization of the Student Aid Fund and the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship. Specifically, $34.5 million, a 28% increase, will provide loans and grants to more than 20,000 students. And $12.2 million, a 15% increase, will fund a variety of scholarships. The additional funding will allow us to support over 20,000 students who are most in need. Additional support is available through an enhanced repayment assistance plan, loan forgiveness for nurses and veterinarians who practice in rural Saskatchewan. More students, Mr. Chair, will be eligible for the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship this year. An estimated 12,500 students will benefit. Eligible students can receive up to $750 a year for up to 4 years. And I'm proud to say that this year we're also providing $50,000 for new Indigenous language scholarships through the First Nations University of Canada. The scholarship will encourage and enable students and potential teachers to study Indigenous languages. Ultimately, this will help revitalize, preserve, and protect Indigenous languages in Saskatchewan. In addition, $3.5 million will be provided for the Saskatchewan Innovation and Opportunities Scholarship, French Language Scholarships, the Queen Elizabeth II Scholarships, and the Scholarship of Honor. This range of financial aid options supports our students and helps build a diverse, educated workforce for our strong and growing economy. And I also want to note the government continues to offer the Graduate Retention Program through the Ministry of Finance. The GRP is the only program of its kind in Canada. It provides up to $20,000 in income tax credits over 7 years to eligible post-secondary graduates who live and work in Saskatchewan after completing their education. The GRP is another way to significantly offset the cost of post-secondary education. To date, more than 81,000 graduates have claimed $739 million in GRP benefits. Overall, in 23-24, our government will invest $111.6 million in direct supports to students through tax credits, grants, and scholarships. Over 20,000 students will benefit from an additional $95 million in financial aid this fiscal year. Saskatchewan student loans are interest-free while students are enrolled. In 21-22, this represented $4.4 million in benefits for students. Our budget maintains an ongoing funding for a variety of key initiatives and strategies with respect to Indigenous supports. I'd like to mention an important area of focus, which is Indigenous post-secondary education. The Ministry of Advanced Education funds numerous projects and initiatives that support Indigenous student success. In 23-24, the Ministry is providing $19.3 million in funding for Indigenous post-secondary education. This includes funding to the First Nations University of Canada, the Saskatchewan Institute or Indian Institute of Technologies, the Gabriel Dumont Institute, the Dumont Technical Institute, Northlands College, and Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Many of their programs support Indigenous students in post-secondary education and their entry into the labor market. One example, Mr. Chair, is the Dene Teacher Education Program in La Loche and the Clearwater River Dene Nation. Newly graduated DTEP teachers are able to instruct their students in the Dene language as part of the K-12 curriculum. This, in turn, is expected to increase student participation and graduation rates at both the elementary and secondary levels in northern Saskatchewan. Mr. Chair, we're providing $255,000 over 4 years to the First Nations University of Canada to deliver the DTEP program in the North. Another initiative funded in our budget is the MyTax program. This creates opportunities for students while helping to meet the needs of employers. The 23-24 budget includes $1.15 million for MyTax research internships, which gives students the opportunity to excel and become champions of innovation. MyTax funding also includes support for an Indigenous Pathways initiative. It provides students with research and developmental skills when they can apply through employment in Saskatchewan businesses. The number of Indigenous students in post-secondary education and their success rates are increasing. So, Mr. Chair, we're on the right track. Over the past 5 years, Indigenous enrollment is up 35% in diploma programs and 25% in bachelor degree programs. And we know that since 2007, the number of Indigenous people with post-secondary credentials has doubled from 22,000 to more than 44,000. However, we recognize there is much more work to do on addressing the educational attainment gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. And we'll continue to foster an inclusive post-secondary sector and seek new ways to increase the enrollment and educational attainment of Indigenous students. Our government is pleased to partner with Heritage Canada to support French language education at 3 institutions in the province: La Cité, La Bac, and the University of Regina, and College Mathieu in Gravelbourg. This is done through the Canada-Saskatchewan Agreement on Minority Language Education and the Second Official Languages Instruction. The 23-24 budget also includes $7.9 million for French language programming, which is an increase of $5 million, and it will be offset by revenue from the federal government. In addition to regular annual funding, these institutions will receive complementary funding for project-based initiatives and infrastructure projects. Funding is also provided for student bursaries. Saskatchewan's international engagement strategy is another key area of focus for the ministry that supports Saskatchewan's growth plan. We continue to advance our post-secondary international engagement strategy, education strategy, which was launched in 2021. It provides a roadmap to enhance Saskatchewan's international profile, attract international students and researchers, and build capacities to support students once they arrive. This budget continues to support key initiatives within that strategy: the Saskatchewan Agent Training Program, the Student Ambassador Program, and the International Practitioner Program. The agency training and practitioner program were the first of their kind in Canada, demonstrating Saskatchewan's leadership in this area. In 23-24, government will continue to support these programs and help us highlight Saskatchewan as a post-secondary destination of choice for international students. Our approach will increase our connections with higher education institutions around the world. It will help us develop high-quality research partnerships, which are key drivers of innovation and trade. Through this work, we're positioning Saskatchewan as a leader in food and energy security and biomedical science. And we are building Saskatchewan's further brand by attracting more students to learn, work, and live in this great province. Mr. Chair, in closing, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our partners across the post-secondary sector for their commitment to ensuring our students receive high-quality education. Our government is equally committed to ensuring that students have access to exceptional training programs and appealing employment opportunities right here at home once they graduate. Our commitment is clear in our financial support for this sector. Saskatchewan has invested $13.4 billion in post-secondary education and student support since 2007. We understand that post-secondary education is a key to a strong and growing economy. We will continue to focus on actions that meet the needs of students, build a stronger workforce, and help us reach our goal: growth that works for everyone. So thank you for your time, Mr. Chair, and to the committee, and I look forward to answering any questions that the committee has.
Thank you, Minister. I'll open up the floor to questions, and I recognize Ms. Bose.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the Minister and to his officials here this afternoon. I am going to, at some point, be turning over the floor to my colleague, the opposition critic for health, to ask some detailed questions around the health profession training seats. But for now, I'll start off with my questions until she arrives later on. So to begin, Minister, starting off with the ministry's multi-year funding agreement with post-secondary institutions, which began in 21-22 and, as you mentioned, is now in year 3 of 4. Beyond predictable funding, which certainly has been recognized and by the opposition as well as something that's desirable for the sector, beyond predictable funding, what was the ministry's intention with this agreement?
Well, I'll start and ask one of my officials to kind of add some commentary to this. But essentially, the idea of the agreement was to provide stable and predictable funding to our sector. To the sector, it provided, as I mentioned in my notes, $60 million over the first 2 years to allow institutions to create some initiatives within the sector which will give them further stability as we move forward. So that was the primary reason for doing it. Certainly, as you mentioned, predictable and stable funding was important to the sector, and it was enthusiastically supported by the sector. But giving them opportunities to create some opportunities within their institutions to ensure stable funding as they went forward. And certainly there's some challenges within post-secondary sector in terms of funding, and so creating some opportunities within the sector to ensure that it's stable and stable funding base for delivery of the programs that they have was the key to the program's intent at the beginning.
Okay, thanks. And that $60 million that you've referred to over the first 2 years, what sort of opportunities to create stability was the ministry looking to grant the institutions?
Are you asking for some of the things that the institutions did with the money?
I'm wondering if there was any specific direction from the ministry around how those dollars were used.
The post-secondary, especially the universities, are self-governing institutions. So we provide the funding to the institutions, and they make their decisions in the best interests of their students and their programming needs. So there was never any directives given to the universities with respect to how they could spend their money. Certainly, the intent of the agreement was to make sure that there was created some opportunities for success in the future, but no direct conversations with the universities. The only other thing that, and I've mentioned this in the House on a number of occasions, with the agreement does provide for caps on tuition. That was something that was important to the government to make sure that students could continue to afford the education which they get from our institutions.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess around those caps on tuition hikes, certainly I understand there are caps for domestic students, but, you know, as we know, there were no caps included for international students. And so how did the government, you know, hope to provide any sort of predictability for the many international students who come to our province to seek opportunities, to seek a high-quality education? Why was that exclusion included under the multi-year funding agreement?
I might just kind of make a comment with respect to the first question that you gave. Certainly, when it came to the multi-year funding agreement, there's some general principles that were involved with respect to that agreement in terms of some conversations that were had around COVID recovery, revenue generation, sector collaboration, and some strategic initiatives in the growth plan. Certainly no specific direction that was given to the institutions in any one of those areas, but that was kind of the general crux of the agreement. In terms of international students, I think the thinking within the sector is that international students be driven more by providing the programming rather than prospective tuition costs. So ensuring that we're making available to international students the kind of programming that they want. I might also add that our international student tuition is among some of the lowest in the country when it comes to a comparative between post-secondary institutions. But certainly ensuring that we're providing the the programming that international students are looking for was a priority for the institutions.
Well, my understanding is that, international students can pay up to 3 to 4 times the amount that domestic students can pay in our province. So when we're looking at that, comparator, it's a major point of contention for international students. We've seen, especially at the U of R campus, international students there who have been raising awareness and lobbying and rallying around a freeze for international tuitions. And is that something that it has been contemplated by your ministry, is a freeze to those fees?
Well, we don't direct the tuition rates to any of our post-secondary institutions, save for the cap that's in the agreement. But I might again comment that we have some of the lowest international tuition rates in the country. So that would be the answer to the question, I think.
Okay, so I mean, I know you've spoken about, undertaking conversations for around a new MOU once the current one has expired, and I understand that's not something that's currently contained in the MOU, but am I correct to understand then that you will not be, for instance, opening up that MOU to address any sort of tuition caps for international students in our province?
Well, I'm not going to comment on, we just started this conversation around what this new funding agreement has looked like, so I'm not going to put any restrictions on any conversations that are going to happen between the government and our post-secondary sector, so I won't commit to it, but certainly all these things play into a conversation when we're looking at what a new funding agreement will look like.
Okay, thanks. And so then as well, with the current MOU, there will be no consideration to opening that up to implement any sort of caps for international student tuition?
Well, we're not looking at the present time of opening up the agreement. We have a 4-year agreement with the institutions. I have said on a number of occasions that we're interested in exploring what a new 4-year funding agreement will look like. Those conversations are currently ongoing within the ministry, and there'll be an engagement with our sector partners starting relatively quickly. We thought it was important to start that conversation now as opposed to waiting until the 4th year of the agreement. So I'm not going to predict or, what nature of those conversations will be, how the agreement is going to unfold, but I can tell you that the institutions are very excited about sitting down and having a conversation with government about what the future looks like for post-secondary training. As I'd mentioned before, this was a historic 4-year funding agreement. The institutions were very excited about having predictability and stability in their funding to be able to make long-term decisions in terms of how they fund their programs, how they support their students. And so in my initial conversations with the leadership at post-secondary institutions, they're very excited about sitting down with ministry and talking about how we move forward from here.
Okay. I understand that as a part of that multi-year funding agreement, that all post-secondary institutions were required to sign a non-disclosure agreement in order to receive funding. Is this true? And if so, why was this a requirement?
Certainly the conversations that were happening with the post-secondary sector were pre-budget, and obviously in having conversations around what budget might look like, those were very sensitive things, and so there was an agreement that none of that would be disclosed pre-budget when the agreement was first entered into, but the agreement's a public document, and certainly the fact that those negotiations were happening pre-budget necessitated the need for confidentiality.
Okay. Well, I also understand that the president or CEO of each institution, together with one negotiator, signed those NDAs, and that those NDAs included a provision requiring that they neither discuss nor disclose the terms of the agreement with other individuals in the institutions, including their own boards. I understand that only after agreement was reached with the institution's senior executive and agreed to by Treasury Board and the Premier, only then was the agreement presented to the boards of the institutions. And would you say this is an accurate depiction of events?
Certainly the conversations that happened were all, as I mentioned before, confidential because they were all pre-budget. Certainly there was no restrictions on having conversations with members of the Board of Directors or the Board of Governors who ultimately are responsible for the ongoing operations of the institution and who approved the agreement.
Okay, because it's my understanding that those agreements that were signed by the institutions were signed before there was any presentation to the boards of the institutions. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, but the ultimate agreement would have been taken to the Board of Governors, who ultimately had the responsibility for endorsing the terms of the agreement. So you reach an agreement in principle with those that are negotiating on behalf of the university, which is the administration, and ultimately the Board of Governors, who have the ultimate authority with respect to approving any agreements that are entered into between the university and the government, or any other institution for that matter.
So when you say agreement in principle, were the agreements not already signed prior to presentation to the board?
They may well have been signed, but certainly there's no authority to bind the university without approval of the Board of Governors.
Okay, because, according to information that I've been provided with, there were really no negotiations necessarily to speak of, and that the agreements were signed, you could suggest, under duress. The message being, kind of take this or you're going to be facing big cuts. Can you speak to the accuracy of that?
I would state unequivocally that there was no pressure put on the institutions with respect to signing an agreement. The fact that they were provided with $60 million in funding, I think, is a pretty significant example of good faith in the government to make sure that these institutions are sustainable going forward. But again, any agreement that gets signed by the administration with respect to whether it's the government or any other one requires the approval of the Board of Governors. And so I would say unequivocally there was no undue influence placed on any member of the administration or the Board of Governors with respect to these agreements. I think all universities and the post-secondary sector were very excited about having the stability of a 4-year funding agreement, and we're all enthusiastic supporters of it.
Okay, so, given what, has been described and confirmed here in terms of the process to sign off on these agreements, does the minister believe that this undermines board autonomy?
Not at all. Boards of Governors have the ultimate authority for endorsing or rejecting anything that the administration signs. And so the fact that the university negotiated an agreement with government, it was up to the Board of Governors to either accept or reject that agreement. And as I said, they were enthusiastic supporters of the agreement when it was negotiated and was presented to the Board of Governors.
And is the minister willing to speak to, the contents of those NDAs and the necessity of those NDAs?
Well, I think I've said that it was important to have confidentiality as we're leading through a budget deliberation. So it's important to maintain the confidentiality of the conversations, especially when it comes to the deliberations around budget. But again, this is a public document. You can read it. I'm sure you probably have. The government or the university has nothing to hide with respect to the negotiations or the agreement itself.
Yes, I understand that the document is now public. Of course, I've seen it. So in terms of my questions, not sure I got an answer fully to that last one. Like, will you speak to the contents of those NDAs that were required to be signed by the institutions?
I mean, I can't speak to the contents of the document. I don't have it in front of me. If you have a specific concern about an element in the agreement, if you have a copy of it, I'm certainly happy to answer that, but I don't have a copy of the agreement, so I can't speak to the contents. What I can say is that it's not uncommon to sign non-disclosure agreements in the context of negotiations, especially when it involves pre-budgetary discussions, and we often do that.
So then, will you agree to provide a copy of that NDA to committee?
I'll have to take the question under advisement. I don't have a copy of it, and I'm not sure that one's available to the ministry, but we will give some consideration to answering the question in due course.
Okay, and when can I expect an answer on that front?
Conversations with my ministry officials immediately after this meeting.
Okay. So, again, with the multi-year funding agreement, when we take a closer look at the government's agreement with post-secondary institutions, we can see that in total, the base funding for post-secondary institutions in Saskatchewan is falling by 13.7% over the agreement's 4-year span. And so if you compare the tuition rate increases, it is almost a percent-for-percent substitution. So the government funding reductions are being replaced with tuition hikes, which are being offloaded onto students and their families. And so as the minister, how are you able to defend this agreement as being acceptable, never mind historic, as you have described it numerous times before?
I'll start by saying our tuition rates are generally in line with tuition rates across the country. If your question is the reduction in funding because of the $60 million that happened in the first 2 years, as I mentioned, that $60 million was provided so that the institutions could take some initiatives to ensure stable funding and stable operations over the next number of years. So it was always understood that the $60 million would be provided in the first year so as to allow the institutions to do things that were going to be providing further stability for funding and the reduction to the base. So if you're saying that, well, funding's been reduced because the $60 million or the $30 million in the first 2 years isn't there, and the fact of the matter is that the institutions were accepting the $60 million so that they could provide some initiatives and do some things within their institution to make sure that there was stability going forward.
Thanks. No, it's not in reference to the $60 million. It's in reference to funding levels prior to the multi-year funding agreement and when taking into account inflation, which we've seen has been a major factor across the board here in Saskatchewan. And certainly post-secondary institutions have not been immune to those inflationary pressures. So that's where we are coming up with that 13.7% reduction. And I guess building on that, you know, that has been in part the basis for the opposition's call for your ministry to open up that multi-year funding agreement, which can be done under the terms of the agreement by mutual consent of the parties in order to account for those inflationary pressures and to adjust those 0% increases that we see in the current year, year 3, and also will be occurring in year 4 of the agreement.
Say this. the fact that we're opening up or starting the conversations a year earlier, I think it's we certainly recognize that there's been some challenges at our post-secondary institutions, particularly around inflation, and that was one of the reasons that I wanted to begin the conversations early with respect to what a new funding agreement will look like. I'm not going to make any commitments on when that agreement will be, what the terms of that agreement is going to be, how it's going to be moved forward. But certainly the government recognizes the fact that there have been some pressures on our institutions which need to be addressed. And that's one of the reasons why we're starting these conversations very early with respect to what a new agreement will look like.
Okay, and I mean, I think that's good that you have initiated those conversations, but what do conversations about an agreement which may be signed, 2 years from now have to do with the inflationary pressures that institutions are facing today with 0% increases?
Well, those are all part of the conversations, right? And then that's why we're starting them early. What the outcome of those conversations will be in terms of what a new agreement looks like, whether it's in 2 years, whether it's in 1 year, I'm not going to comment on that. But the fact of the matter is that the government has recognized the need for further conversations in this sector to make sure that we're providing the appropriate supports to our post-secondary institutions so that they can provide the support that they need to the students that they're responsible for.
Okay, so I mean, I'm taking it from your answers that you have no intention of opening up that agreement to address the 0% increases in the final 2 years of this present agreement.
I'll just say government has made no commitments in that regard. So all I'll say is the fact that we've started to initiate these conversations, I think, is indicative of the government's understanding of where we need to go in terms of funding post-secondary education.
And have the leaders from institutions been in contact with you? Have they described to you the inflationary pressures that they are experiencing as a result of those 0% increases, which were negotiated prior to an inflationary crisis taking place?
Well, there's certainly ongoing conversations between ministry officials and leadership at our post-secondary institutions. I've had the opportunity to spend a great number of hours with the leadership at our 3 major institutions to talk about some of the challenges, and that was part of the conversation. Those conversations which really led to the discussion about talking about what the future funding of post-secondary education looks like in the context of a funding agreement.
Okay, so, speaking of inflationary pressures and, measures that have been taken through other ministries under your government, such as, the Ministry of Education and K-12, there were some dollars for inflationary pressures that were provided. And so I guess then my question is, why would the same measures not be taken through the Ministry of Advanced Education? If it's deemed to be appropriate for our K-12 system, why not for our post-secondary system?
As I mentioned in my last answer, I have spent many, many hours with the leaders of our 3 large institutions, and none of whom have asked for interim funding.
Okay. So I note from the budget that there has been a substantial decrease in funding to universities as well as federated and affiliated colleges. And so I'd like to know how the minister justifies this reduction.
There's a $24.5 million increase in our budget from last year, and I think I went through my notes, so I can go through them again to talk about what the commitments that the government has made to our post-secondary institutions. But there's a number of key supports that have been given to the institutions, so an additional $24.5 million in funding will help our institutions deliver the programming which we expect them to deliver. So perhaps you could give me a little bit of guidance in terms of your comments with respect to the budgetary reduction.
Yeah, so
because the government has given more money this year.
Okay, so I mean, of course, we all understand that there's different sort of buckets of spending, and yes, there have been some investments in terms of capital, student supports, but again, when we're talking about the operating grants we're looking at, so if you see a 0% increase, and I mean, if you're taking inflation into account, that actually amounts to a cut. That's the reality of the situation. And so I want to know, like, whether you acknowledge that that represents a cut to our universities and institutions, including federated and affiliated colleges, and how you justify the institutions effectively taking cuts as a result of the budget.
To the member, I justify it by the fact that we've signed a 4-year funding agreement with the institutions. The institutions knew what they were getting into when they signed it. We've had no complaints about the funding agreement. I could read into the record a number of quotes from leaders of our post-secondary institutions, both the University of Saskatchewan, the University of Regina, and Sask Polytechnic, about this government's commitment to post-secondary education, none of whom have come to me and said they are looking for interim funding in this year's budget. So I think I'll answer the question simply by saying we've entered into a funding agreement, the details of which certainly are known, were known to the institutions when they signed it. I've already commented that we've recognized that there are some challenges that have been faced by the institutions, and that's one of the reasons why we want to have a conversation about what a new funding agreement looks like and the elements of that funding agreement, and those conversations will be starting relatively quickly.
Okay, so, you know, you indicated in your last response here that the institutions knew what they were getting into, but clearly, you know, they did not. At the start of that agreement, when it was initially signed by the institutions, they did not know, and none of us knew the extent of the inflationary pressures that would be faced, you know, across our province, including at the institutions. They're certainly not immune to those pressures. And so, you know, to say that, you know, they knew what they were getting into, they willingly signed, been no issues. I mean, we saw, for instance, the president of the University of Regina Faculty Association come here to the legislature and say very clearly that, very clearly requesting a reconsideration of the terms of that MOU in terms of funding, and saying, yes, there are pressures, and yes, there are issues that are extremely problematic, certainly for that institution, but for all institutions, big pressures.
Well, the president of the University of Regina has not come to me and asked me to reopen this agreement, and that's who I deal with. So he hasn't asked for any interim funding. But what I have said to him, and I've said this a number of times, including today, we're certainly willing to have a conversation with our post-secondary sectors to make sure that we're meeting their needs. And this will all be part of the conversations which my ministry staff will be having with the leadership of our institutions. But no leader of any of the post-secondary institutions, whether it's the University of Saskatchewan, Regina, or Sask Polytechnic, has come to me and asked for interim funding, either before the budget or after the budget.
Mm-hmm. And so, Minister, what do you believe the financial implications will be for the universities as a result of this decrease in funding? What do you think will be the implications financially?
I mean, I think you really have to talk to the institutions about that. You know, we've seen the budgets, we've seen the commentary that's been brought forward by the University of Regina, and I'll read this quote in. I mean, the University of Regina has said that there'll be no academic programs being eliminated due to budget pressures, so the impact on the students and their academic experience will be minimal, while continuing to provide all the supports that they typically provide to students. So I think really you're going to have that question to the leadership of the institutions. But again, I'll repeat my answer. We've had no requests from leadership at any of our post-secondary institutions for increased funding outside the Memorandum of Understanding.
Okay, so yeah, certainly, you know, we will have those discussions with leadership from institutions, but I would assume that you, as well as the minister, would be assessing those financial implications in your role. I'd like to know, you know, what advice does the minister have for our universities in terms of managing these funding reductions? What advice are you giving to them?
Well, I don't give them any advice. The universities, I don't give them any advice. The universities are self-governing institutions. They make their own decisions based on the funding that's provided by the government and their other sources of income. I mentioned in my opening comments that there are a number of initiatives that the universities are taking to increase the revenue generation at their institutions. But those conversations are all conversations that have with the universities. They will make their own decisions based on their budget, based on priorities, based on efficiencies that the leaderships of the institutions think are necessary to continue to provide the services to the students that they believe are important, not just to the university, but to the province and to the growth of this province and our economy.
So I think we are already starting to see the financial implications. We're seeing it in terms of tuition hikes. We saw just recently 4%, the maximum 4% in tuition hikes at the U of S, followed by the maximum 4% of tuition hikes at the U of R. So, you know, again, it's just pointing to the fact that this reduction in funding, this lack of funding, is being borne by students and their families through ever more tuition hikes in our province. And so I want to know, you know, how do you feel that it's acceptable for university students and their families to be bearing the burden of your government's underfunding of our institutions?
I mentioned in my opening comments that in terms of university tuition, we're, as a percentage of the revenue of one of our institutions is pretty much about the middle of the pack. I do want to emphasize the fact that we do provide through our institutions a significant level of student support, whether that's through the graduate retention program, whether that's through student loans, student loan forgiveness in a number of areas. So I think it's fair to say that the government, through the Ministry of Advanced Education, is cognizant of some of the challenges which students encounter. That's why we have the programs that we do. That's why we've had significant increases to our student supports over the last number of years, including some significant support in additions to our student aid fund this last year. So my suggestion to you is that you can't take one in isolation of the other. You have to look at the whole picture, and the student loan supports that we provide are significant for students to be able to achieve their potential through post-secondary education.
So, Minister, do you believe the universities will be able to sustain university operations without significant disruption to the quality of programs, education, and services that are provided to students?
I do. I have great confidence in the administration of the universities and their boards of governors to continue to provide the high quality of education that we need them to provide. As I've said before, we'll continue to work with our post-secondary sector to make sure that we're providing the proper level of support, and I think it's indicative of the government's level of support for post-secondary that we're starting to have conversations around what a new funding agreement will look like.
Okay, so let's take an example here. Let's take a look at the University of Regina. We understand, I mean, it's very clear that the U of R is particularly challenged at this time. In fact, just this week, I've been informed that the U of R has begun laying off non-academic staff, with at least 17 out-of-scope layoffs and 2 in-scope layoffs that I'm aware of. There may be more. We're hearing of academic layoffs forthcoming, also as well as significant vacancy management occurring across the institution. So will the minister speak to these specific pressures that the U of R is clearly facing and what he anticipates as a result of these pressures?
I think this is a question properly put to the president of the university. In his press release this week, and I've read part of that release, he's not anticipating any academic programs be eliminated due to budget cuts. I fully expect the universities to be operating within the budgetary constraints and the operating grants that we give them. I would fully expect them to find efficiencies in the delivery of their programming. But I also fully expect, and I have great confidence in the leadership at the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan, to ensure that they continue to provide the high quality of programming that we expect them to do. But again, I think the question really needs to be put to the University of Regina. I think these are independent organizations. They will make the decisions that they need to make within the budgetary provisions, within the grant that we provide to the institutions to make sure that they continue to provide the high quality of education. Again, I don't fault anyone for looking at efficiencies and to try to determine whether they can be better and more efficient in the delivery of the programs that they're required to deliver. But again, the university has said that there will be no academic programs being eliminated, and they've gone on to say that they'll continue to provide strong student support, such as student wellness, counseling services, the Center of Experiential and Service Learning, and investments in credit transfer programming. And I think we can all be thankful for the fact that they're going to continue to provide those services and the high quality of education that we expect them to deliver.
So in your view, are layoffs acceptable ways to achieve efficiencies at the institutions, and how will this not impact student education?
I leave these decisions to the universities. I don't make the decisions with respect to staffing. I don't make decisions with respect to programming. I don't make any of the decisions in respect of the operations of the institution. But I believe, and I have, as said before on many occasions, I have great confidence in the leadership of the University of Regina and our other post-secondary institutions to do what they need to do to make sure that they continue to provide the high-quality program that we expect from them. The University of Regina decides that they need to do some things in order to create more efficiencies with respect to the delivery of the programming at the university. I fully expect them to do that, but I don't tell them to do that. These are all decisions that they make in the best interests of their institution.
Ms. Bose, I'm
Yes.
just going to interject here as chair. I provide plenty of leeway in questioning, but we're going round and round with the same questions. So I would ask you to move on to your next set, please.
Okay. So on that note, just to your response there, certainly I understand that you don't make those decisions as minister, but I would hope that you understand that the level of funding provided by your government forces the hand of the institutions to be forced into making decisions like that. So moving on to my next set of questions. Will the government be providing emergency funding to the U of R, as has been called for by both the University of Regina Faculty Association and the opposition?
As I've said before, the leadership of the University of Regina has not asked for any interim funding. We will be respectful of the memorandum of understanding, as we expect all the institutions who are subject to that memorandum of understanding to be respectful of it.
And Minister, what is your vision overall for the universities going forward?
Well, I'm not really sure how to answer that. I mean, we expect our institutions to provide high-quality education. They are critical to the growth of this province. They're critical to the economy and the future of Saskatchewan. We want our students to study here. We want them to stay here. We want them to work and raise a family. So my expectations of our post-secondary institutions is to continue to provide the same quality of service, of education that they have provided in the past, service and education, which I'm very, very proud of in terms of the leadership of the institutions and the quality of the education. They have an international reputation with respect to a lot of the programming that they deliver, and I fully expect that that will continue.
And so, stemming from that, is it part of your government's long-term vision to amalgamate the University of Regina with the University of Saskatchewan?
No.
Okay, so if the answer is no, we're looking at,
Let me just qualify that. I mean, there's certainly a lot of cooperation going on between our institutions, and that was one of the pillars in the Memorandum of Understanding. I have been very clear with the leadership of our institutions that we want more collaboration between our institutions with respect to the delivery of programming to ensure that we're as efficient as possible when it comes to delivery of that programming. But the unequivocal answer with respect to the merging of the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan is no.
Ms. Bowes, I'm just going to interject one more time. We're dealing with estimates, not future whatever you have in mind. So I'll just ask you to stick to the estimates as they are presented in the budget, and please proceed.
Okay, so, in terms of this budget and the implications that it has for the institution, specific to U of R and to this year's budget limited to that, looking at the cuts that are coming down the line, the institution has said that they are looking to achieve 5% cuts across the board at that institution. So I'm predicting, 3 or 4 more years of this kind of underfunding that we're seeing at the U of R, and I don't know that the institution will be able to continue on. So, you'd said, again, in terms of the funding levels and the impact that that has on this institution in particular, you had said that, it's not your long-term vision to amalgamate. Is it the vision to amalgamate programs, say, between the U of R and the U of S?
As I've mentioned before, I don't make programming decisions. Certainly in my time as the minister, I've encouraged more cooperation between our institutions to the extent that that ensures more efficient delivery of programs. I certainly leave this to the leadership at the institutions to discuss how best programs can be delivered. If there are opportunities for University of Regina programs to be delivered in Saskatoon, which there are, we would encourage that if that is in the best interests of the institution and the students that they serve. University of Saskatchewan programs in Regina, and we encourage that because if that's in the best interest of the delivery of programming at our post-secondary institutions, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see more cooperation between our technical institutes and our universities, and there's a lot of that. And if you go back to the Health Human Resources Action Plan, that's a collaboration of all 3 institutions to make sure that we can provide the training and the support to support that plan. So I'm very, very fortunate to have the leadership at the institutions that I do have. We're at a very, very good spot when it comes to that leadership, and I would continue to encourage them to work together to find the best ways to deliver programs, whether that's at the University of Regina, University of Saskatchewan, or Sask Polytechnic, or any of the regional colleges.
So, Minister, in advance of this budget, both the University of Saskatchewan Students Association and the University of Regina Students Association had lobbied you directly as the minister for a number of things. One was the elimination of interest on Saskatchewan student loans, as was done with federal student loans. And so I'd like to know why this measure was not undertaken in the budget.
As you know, Saskatchewan student loans are interest-free while students are in study for 6 months. And for 6 months following their graduation. We did not support, the federal government decided that they were going to remove interest from student loans. We did not follow suit. We provide a significant amount of financial support to students, whether that's through loan forgiveness, whether that's through a number of other programs. And so it was our view at the time, and continues to be, that we will not be removing the interest from student loans as the federal government did, and in line with a number of other provinces that have not done that.
So it would seem to me that this would be a very common sense, practical cost of living measure that your government could be taking, of which we saw very little in the budget overall. And so I'd like to know, did your ministry assess what the cost of implementing this recommendation would be?
Well, let me just say that we have we have a number of programs to assist with respect to the repayment of student loans. We have our repayment assistance plan, which makes repayment more affordable for about 4,000 Saskatchewan students. We've increased the zero payment threshold for single borrowers from $25,000 to $40,000. And we've aligned repayment income thresholds for larger thresholds with the Canada Student Loan Grants. So taking into account a number of things that we have done in terms of reducing monthly student loan payments from 20% to 10%, has been, I think, significant in allowing students to afford the repayment of their student loans.
Okay, well, obviously, I find it quite unfortunate that, this wouldn't be a measure that would be considered because, not only are students being made to bear the burden of increased tuition hikes due to underfunding, but then they are then also being made to bear the expense of increased interest on, those hikes in tuition rates as well, which, again, I mean, I'd like to know from your ministry, I would assume the numbers have been calculated as to what that cost would represent.
I don't have that number in front of me, but I can tell you that in terms of student loan repayment, we do have our graduate retention program, and you've heard me speak about this, the number of people that have received that, over 81,000 students who get the tax credit every year. And so that tends to be, I think, a significant offset to any interest that they would be paying on student loans. So that's the only program of its kind in the country. And for those that can't afford to repay their student loans, there are a number of loan forgiveness programs that the government has to assist those students.
Okay, so fair enough if you don't have that number in front of you. Will your ministry commit to getting us that number?
We'll endeavor to try to find that number for you.
Okay. So, I mean, you're speaking, and you've mentioned in your opening remarks and just now the graduate retention program, which, as you say, one of its kind. My understanding is that other jurisdictions, used to have similar programs, and that all other jurisdictions who had a similar program actually abandoned it because they found it was not effective. Is that your understanding?
I'm not familiar with I'm not familiar with any other provinces or jurisdictions that had a similar program.
And are your officials able to speak to that?
I can't speak to any other jurisdiction. I understand there are a couple of jurisdictions that had them, that got rid of them. I don't know what the details of those programs are, but I am aware of the fact that in certain student surveys that have been done in Saskatchewan, this is a very, very popular program for us to be able to provide to students so that they can have that tax deduction in the years following their graduation from university.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it is popular, but popular does not equal effective. And as I understand it, we have some of the lowest rates of graduate retention across Canada. So, you spoke to, the total number of dollars that have been invested in the graduate retention program over the 7 years it's been in place. You spoke to the number of students who have accessed that program. But in terms of measuring that program's effectiveness, I'd like to know if that work has been done by your ministry, and specifically, what are the, for instance, one-year retention rates on graduates in Saskatchewan?
I'm aware that in the graduate student surveys, one of the reasons that a number of students stayed was the graduate retention program. I can't comment on the rate of retention. I would be surprised to hear that Saskatchewan had the lowest rate of student retention. I'm not sure you got those numbers from. But certainly one of the key factors in building our programs and funding post-secondary education is to ensure that students stay and work here in Saskatchewan, and the student retention, that student retention program is a key element of that.
Okay, so is that something that your ministry tracks, retention rates for graduates?
I don't have any exact numbers. I can certainly give you some percentages with respect to certain programming, but I don't have an overall number of graduate. The grad survey is a voluntary survey, right? And so that's where we get a lot of our numbers. But I do have some graduation rates and some retention numbers from a number of our programming. Certainly nothing that comes close to the full number of programs that are delivered by the university. But we can undertake to try to get you some numbers together. I'm happy to do that.
Okay, yeah, I mean, based on the information we were able to find through Stats Canada, outside the Maritime, Saskatchewan has the lowest rates of graduate retention after both 1 year and after 5 years following graduation. So, in addition, we've seen statistics again by Stats Canada saying that after 5 years of graduation, 53% of international students in Saskatchewan leave the province. So it would appear quite clearly to me that this program is not serving its intended purpose. And, while it may be a popular program, surely we would assume, I'm sure taxpayers would assume that the government would be undertaking program evaluation to assess the efficacy of these programs that they're providing beyond just, touting the numbers of people who have accessed it and how much has been paid out. So, has there been any assessment by your government of this program in terms of its efficacy?
So are you suggesting that we eliminate the program? Is your suggestion that we eliminate the program? Because from our perspective and from the graduate surveys that we do, it's a very popular program, ensuring that there's further retention of people who want to work and live in Saskatchewan. I'm just looking at some numbers. For instance, in our registered psychiatric nursing diploma program, 91% grad retention rates. A number of these, pharmacy technicians, 90%, 100% for licensed practical nurses. So I'm not sure that, knowing what the foundation of the numbers from Statistic Canada are, not sure I can really comment on that. I think we have a pretty good retention rate of graduates that come from the University of Saskatchewan and the university and our post-secondary institutions. And I think the graduate retention program is a key factor in that.
So you think the lowest graduate retention rates in Canada behind the Maritimes are pretty good?
I'm not acknowledging that that's in fact a fact.
Well, are your officials able to confirm those numbers? I mean, it's all available online by Stats Canada.
I kind of find this a little interesting. I mean, in one respect, you want us to add supports to post-secondary institutions, and now you want us to remove one. I can tell you that with respect to international students, part of our international engagement strategy is not just to bring students here who want to stay and work in Saskatchewan, but educating students who are going to go back to their home countries to provide the good quality support that their people need in their countries. And so to suggest that our graduate retention rate with respect to international students is low, there's an effect here. We want students to come and work and live in Saskatchewan and be trained here, but we're also not discouraging them from going back to the countries that they came from to provide the necessary supports to the people in their home countries. And so that's all part of our international engagement strategy.
So a few more questions. I mean, I didn't receive a response of, whether your officials are able to confirm those numbers, but I'm pretty confident in them myself, and maybe you can have a look at them as minister later on. I'd like to know, you listed a number of fields of study and good retention rates, which is great to hear. So I guess then my question is, where are we losing grads? What programs, of study, what fields of study are we most predominantly losing our graduates from?
So I'm just looking at a graph of retention rates. Hang on a second. Sorry, I lost it. So it looked from looking at the chart, and I can provide you with a copy of the chart that I just looked at, that our international and domestic retention rates were pretty significant, and they were at par with a number of Western provinces, and certainly toward the higher end. So I'm not sure where you get your numbers from, but we'll certainly provide that graph to you showing that our retention rates are pretty good, not just with respect to domestic students, but international students as well.
Well, I'll very much look forward to reviewing that. Yeah, as I mentioned, we're getting our numbers from Stats Canada. So, I don't think I received an answer in terms of whether your ministry has actually performed any form of evaluation of the efficacy of the graduate retention program beyond saying that, you know, you've assessed it through a survey as being a popular program. But I take it that the answer then is no.
You shouldn't assume that. The fact is that once you look at this graph, and I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, you'll see the retention rates are pretty significant, especially with respect to the Western Canadian provinces. And so I think when you look at that, and our view is, my personal view is, the graduate retention program is a key factor in ensuring that we retain students in this province once they graduate. So you shouldn't assume that no was an answer to that.
Okay, well then I would ask for a direct answer. Has there been an evaluation through your ministry of the efficacy of the graduate retention program since its inception 7 years ago?
Well, I think I'm just going to repeat what I said before. I think the efficacy of the program is demonstrated by the fact that there's been 81,000 students that have taken advantage of it, all of whom have to stay and work in Saskatchewan. So I think that demonstrates the efficacy of the program.
Okay, well, I think we're probably not going to be able to get much further in this back and forth. But I would like to know, just again, related to the graduate retention program, you mentioned the total amount that's been paid out. You mentioned the total number of students who have accessed that program since its inception. And I'd like to know, in the last year, how much was paid out in tax credits through the graduate retention program?
In 2023, the estimate of the graduate retention program, and of course this is a program that's administered by the Minister of Finance, will be $65 million. That was the revised number from 2022, $65.8 million in 21, and in 20 it was $66.6 million in tax credits.
Okay. So I guess, you know, my suggestion here, unsolicited, is that this government would be doing better to invest on the front end of investments for student supports versus the substantial amount of money that has been invested in this program over the last 7 years, which, according to, as I said, the numbers we've accessed through Stats Canada, is showing that this program is actually not serving its intended purpose, and I would suggest is the reason that other jurisdictions across Canada have done away with this sort of a program. I want to, you know, come back a little bit to.
I want to just answer that, because it seems to me that if what you're advocating for is the elimination of the program, which allows graduates to stay and work and gives them a further incentive to stay and work in Saskatchewan, I'd suggest that that's not particularly supportive of the economy or the growth of this province. Because from our perspective, anything that we can do as a government to encourage people to stay and work in Saskatchewan, to raise their families, those are good things for Saskatchewan. That's good for the economy and it's good for the future of this province. And to suggest that we get rid of a program that does that, I just don't think is very responsible. So I just wanted to say that on the record. The fact of the matter is that we have funding agreements in place with our institutions. We'll continue to have conversations with them about what that looks like. But to eliminate a program, and I don't know what the reasons were that other provinces eliminated them. I don't know what the benefit was that they had in terms of their retention or their tax credit. But to suggest that we get rid of a program that encourages people to stay and work in Saskatchewan, I don't think is particularly responsible.
Well, I mean, that's good to know. So just to be clear, what is being suggested is that there are more supports for students on the front end when they're looking to, start off their education versus the back end where, money's being doled out, but it's not proving to be effective in actually retaining graduates at any significant level. So, that's what we are pushing more towards, especially when we've got, for undergraduate domestic student rates, tuition rates, we've got the second highest rates in the entire country. So, when you're talking about a program that, will provide tax credits to students upon graduation, well, I mean, how many prospective students are not even able to access a post-secondary education in this province because of that lack of front-end investment by the government?
Well, I kind of reject that too. I mean, the fact of the matter is there's $112 million in student supports through loans, scholarships, bursaries, grants, and other supports. That's $9 million more than last year. To suggest that we're being deficient with respect to front-end supports of students, I think, is wrong. So to provide supports to students on the front end and the back end is important. And I think that just to simply abandon supports at the back end, I mean, we're not going to eliminate our student loan repayment programs. We're not going to eliminate a number of the programs that benefit students once they graduate. And so to suggest that everything should be on the front end and nothing on the back end, I don't think is particularly responsible either.
So, I mean, here's a suggestion, something for consideration. Instead of, the current program that's on offer, you spoke earlier about, the government offering return for service agreements for nurses and for veterinarians in rural Saskatchewan. So, I mean, what about that as a much more, effective measure to actually ensure that we're going to be retaining graduates instead of a program that really has no sort of criteria that would require a grad to remain in province? I mean, it's basically kind of, it seems to me that that would be a much more efficient way of A, providing those upfront supports, and also B, ensuring that we'll have graduates who will be remaining in the province with, tied to that support.
We do provide return of service agreements in a number of areas. I think that in providing these kinds of, going to the graduate retention program in particular, those tax savings are spent in Saskatchewan because those people are working in Saskatchewan, they're paying tax in Saskatchewan, and they're raising their families. So that money that we invest in the graduate retention program through the tax credits is all being spent in Saskatchewan. And it's all being recirculated through the economy. But on your other point, we do have return of service agreements in a number of different areas, and that's something that we continually consider whether expanding those types of return of service agreements are important in any one particular area.
Okay, so I'd like to come back to, the earlier discussion about those lobby documents by USSU and URSU. And so of all the recommendations out of both of those documents, did your government make any commitments reflective of these recommendations in the most recent budget?
When I meet with the Students' Union or when I meet with any organization where they have suggestions with respect to how we can better support students, how we can better support our institutions, all those suggestions get put together. They go to my ministry. My ministry officials assess those. At the time that I had my conversations with the USSU, we were right in the middle of budget negotiations or budget consideration in terms of this year's budget. But all those discussions all form a package of information that I take to my ministry to give some consideration to as we're doing our budget deliberations.
Okay, so that doesn't answer the question. Were any of those recommendations included in this year's budget?
We increased the amount of money in our student aid fund. That was one of the things they had talked about. We incorporated some changes with respect to loan forgiveness in a number of areas. So there was a number of things that the students had brought forward to me that we gave some consideration to, not all of which made it into the budget. A number of them do get consideration in terms of how we enhance our funding to this sector. But I'm always willing to have conversations with students, both at all our post-secondary institutions, to see what we can do better. And those are all conversations that I take forward with my ministry and have discussions about how they can be incorporated into the budget. But I've given you a couple of examples, and the fact that we increased funding in our student aid fund, the fact that we provide more student supports, I think is indicative of some of the comments that those students had made to me.
Okay, well, so just, to read into the record here, some of the recommendations that student leaders from our universities have been asking this government for. One was in terms of the relief of student debt, as I mentioned before, eliminating interest on student loans, which is a very simple and effective measure that this government could implement. Another was replacing student loans with upfront non-repayable grants for low-income students, increasing scholarships, grants, and bursaries, specifically for Indigenous and international students. Number of measures around fairness for international students, and we talked earlier about the fundamental unfairness of the tuition rates that international students are subject to in our province, the fact that they're paying 3 to 4 times the rates of tuition that domestic students are, and there's no caps on tuition hikes in the Memorandum of Understanding undertaken by the government and the post-secondary institutions. They're looking for, increased funding support for graduate students, measures to address student mental health needs. That's one thing I hear consistently from student leaders at our institutions. They're looking for more assistance from the government around creation of sexual assault and violence prevention policy, creation of trans rights legislation, and, in Ursu's document, addressing issues with a performance-based funding model. Also from USSU, they were calling for a 1-year student loan repayment grace period. Many of the recommendations between the two student organizations were very similar, but from my understanding, there wasn't much consideration that was given at all to these recommendations in the budget, even though the students made every effort to meet with you as the minister prior to the budget.
I mean, we did do a couple of things. I mentioned before, there's a $1.5 million increase in the Student Advantage Scholarship. It's something that they talked about that was important. There's a lot of requests when I met with the students, and for them to expect that all of that would be incorporated into 1-year budget, I think is a little unreasonable. But we do take those suggestions forward and give some consideration to them in the, given the priorities of my ministry and given the priorities of government.
All right, well, I hope that there will be follow-up from your ministry with those student leaders. They put a lot of work into these lobby documents. It's my understanding that this is the first time that the student leadership at the two universities have brought forward a lobby document of this type, and I would hope that, this government would take the concerns and the recommendations of our students, our future leaders in this province very seriously.
Students are a key stakeholder in this sector. That's why I meet with them. That's why I make every opportunity to have conversations with student leaders. Just yesterday, leadership from Sask Polytechnic was in the house, and I took the opportunity to spend almost an hour with them to talk about issues. But as I said, they are a key stakeholder in the delivery of public education. It's why they have representation at the Board of Governors, at the Board of Governors table. It's why they have representation when it comes to meeting the senior leadership at Sask Polytechnic. I know that a lot of what they've suggested have been directed through those institutions. A lot of the things that they asked for when they met with me are things that we would expect the university to take quite seriously and in fact have. So we would continue to encourage them to have conversations with leadership at their institutions, which I've said before are independent institutions. And I'll continue to have conversation with student leaders and share those conversations, not just with my ministry officials, but with leadership at the university as well.
Right. So speaking of Sask Poly, what would your description of the financial implications of this budget be for Sask Poly, specifically in terms of any tuition increases we might expect here, in addition to what we've already seen at the universities?
Just to follow up on the last question, one of the other initiatives that we have started this year, we've created a student council where we'll have formal conversations with leadership at the institutions, and not just leadership at the institutions, but students generally who might not otherwise be represented by student unions. So we'll be having those conversations. As far as Sask Poly is concerned, we haven't heard from them with respect to what their intentions are with respect to tuition rate increases.
Okay, and what about at Saskatchewan's Indigenous institutions? Do you expect, or are you aware of any tuition hikes expected at these institutions?
First Nations University tuition levels will come from the University of Regina. We haven't heard from any of the other institutions. I think May is when their budgets are due, so we'll know more then.
Okay, and you know, in terms of these institutions being able to sustain operations without significant disruption to the quality of programs, education, and services provided to students, what do you have to say about that? Will these institutions be able to do so?
I fully expect that they will. We provided, as I mentioned before, in terms of the funding for technical institutes, $1.71 million to support those technical schools and so and other institutions. And so I fully expect that they'll continue to be able to deliver the educational programming that they have as in the past.
And so specific to Sask Poly, we've been hearing concerns, you know, about long wait lists for programs at this institution. And can you provide me with all of the waiting lists by program at Sask Poly? And I understand I don't need that here tonight, but if that could be provided in writing, that would be appreciated.
We know that there are some waiting lists to get into programs. Certainly, that's generated based on the strength of the economy and the number of people that we require. That's why we've been spending a significant amount of time working with our institutions to make sure that they are providing the level of education and the number. Certainly, there's some challenges when it comes to providing instructors for certain courses, and I know that the Sask Poly and the other technical schools work as hard as they can to make sure that they have the proper training in place. But I think that's just simply an example of the strength of the economy and the number of people that want to work. Graduation rates at Sask Poly are in the high 90s in terms of graduation rates, and in the high 90s for those that graduate that end up having a job, some of whom have a job before in the first year of their program. So we're very proud of the delivery of the programs that SAS Poly provides. But again, these are all things that we work on with our institutions to make sure that they're providing the support to their students in order to get the people trained that we need to support the economy.
Okay, thanks. So I didn't get an answer to that. Will you be willing to provide that?
I don't have that. We can certainly ask the institutions for SAS Poly for whatever numbers that they have, but I don't have those numbers.
Okay, yes, I understand you don't have them here today, but will you undertake to get those numbers and to get them to the opposition?
We'll undertake to ask for them, yeah. So.
Okay. You know, this is something that has been a question in you know, the minds of some people that I've spoken with, that I've heard from. I want to know, you know, is it part of your government's long-term plan for SAS Poly to take over the regional colleges at a certain point in time?
No. We have a brokerage program from SAS Poly where SAS Poly brokers those programs to the regional colleges. And that's been a relationship that's worked very, very well in terms of SAS Poly providing the programming support to our regional colleges. We have no intention of amalgamating any of our regional colleges into SAS Poly.
Okay, thanks. And, you know, on the regional colleges, unlike most of the rest of the post-secondary system, the regional colleges have not seen significant changes to their legislation and regulations. And so I'd like to know, why is this and what are your intentions here?
I've got no, I mean, I talked to leadership at our regional colleges on a regular basis. We've been to almost every regional college to discuss issues of concern. Opening up the act or having changes to the legislation or regulations isn't something that has been brought to my attention in any great degree. So I really have no immediate intention in opening up the act, but certainly willing to consider any conversations or any suggestions that the regional colleges have with respect to amendments to the legislation which we might want to think about.
Okay, and so, you know, on the topic of that legislation, I note that there is a requirement in legislation for a review of regional colleges at least every 5 years, yet no review has occurred since the fall and winter of 2010 to 11. So, you know, in that time, 2 more reviews should have occurred since then, and I'd like to know, you know, why has the ministry not met their statutory requirements, and when will another review take place?
Ms. Bowes, I'll just remind you that the minister may or may not answer this question because it is outside of estimates, and I would encourage you to stay on track, please.
You'd like?
I will defer to the minister to make a decision whether he decides to answer or not.
Either now or tomorrow, so I'll answer it now. We are aware that there is a statutory requirement for the review, and I'll be having a conversation with my ministry officials about that. Tell you why, but certainly we're aware of our statutory obligation.
Okay. So I guess specific to this, you know, this year, this coming year, is that something, you know, now that you understand that that statutory requirement has not been met, is that something within this coming year that will be undertaken?
Certainly a conversation I'll have with my ministry officials and my colleagues in cabinet.
Okay. In terms of the regional colleges, I had a question about, what is the role of the regional college board versus, the role of yourself as the minister?
Well, we expect the regional college boards to, provide oversight and direction to the CEO of a regional college, to look to her for guidance with respect to delivery of programs and needs in the region. We certainly work with the regional colleges on a regular basis with respect to ensuring that they're providing the training and the educational opportunities that people in their particular region need, and so that's the role. I mean, there's certainly an oversight role by the ministry and the minister with respect to our regional colleges. As I mentioned before, I spent a great deal of time talking to our regional colleges about what their needs are, what their requirements are, what the local training requirements might be, and then we work within the ministry to prioritize those among our regional colleges in terms of providing the appropriate support.
Okay. I wanted to know too, around the regional colleges, what role do the regional colleges play in terms of local labor market development and planning?
Well, they don't do a lot in terms of labor market development. I mean, the businesses in the area will let the regional colleges know what their labor market needs are. I encourage them, and the ministry encourages the leadership at our regional colleges to be in pretty close contact with their local businesses, with the local economy, to see what the needs are in any particular area, and then work to provide the programming that's necessary to support the labor market needs in that particular area.
Okay. Okay, yeah, that's good to know. It's my understanding that this used to be something that was a regular occurrence, is that, the colleges would consult with local businesses, and is that something that still happens in order to make that determination?
We encourage that, sure. We encourage that those conversations take place, and regional colleges do that. Certainly, if we become aware of a particular need in a particular area with a particular industry, we will provide information and support to our regional colleges in that regard. But certainly, the interface between the regional college and their local economy is critical to ensuring that they meet the local labor market needs, and important that the ministry then provides support to the regional colleges to meet those within the priorities set by the ministry.
Okay, I had a few other questions before our opposition health critic arrives. I think she'll be here fairly soon. You'd mentioned earlier loan forgiveness, and I was wanting to ask, who is currently eligible for loan forgiveness?
I'll have my deputy minister answer the question. Sure.
Hi, Denise Matza, Deputy Minister of Advanced Education. In terms of loan forgiveness, nurses are offered $4,000 per year up to $20,000. In terms of loan forgiveness, nurse practitioners, the same values, $4,000 a year up to a $20,000 cap. Veterinarians and vet techs have similar loan forgiveness opportunities, $4,000 a year up to a $20,000 cap. That is for Saskatchewan loan forgiveness.
Okay, so just the nurses, nurse practitioners, vets and vet techs then?
Yeah.
Okay, and so how do you assess which disciplines are eligible for loan forgiveness? What is that based on?
The loan forgiveness decisions are part of normal budget deliberations, and it's based on the needs of the economy and the needs to retain professions in the critical areas.
Okay, and has there been any discussion, for instance, with this budget, in expanding loan forgiveness to any other professions or groups?
Every year, considerations like that go forward, but they're part of budget deliberations.
So are you saying then that with this budget, there's going to be no expansion to other professions or groups beyond the ones you listed?
Current budget, no other professions are provided loan forgiveness, just the one that I've outlined.
Okay. So it's my understanding, I mean, we talk about a major, there's all kinds of talk about labor shortages, about certainly many sectors that are having difficulty recruiting and retaining workers in our province. And so it would seem to me that, this loan forgiveness program may be, an expansion of this may be a key way to address some of those shortages. And so is that something that is, up for further consideration by your ministry?
These are all considerations that we have as we build our budget, and decisions are made based on priorities within relative ministries and with the priorities of the government. So we do have conversations with respect to how we can best support the economy. And as we go forward, I'm sure there will be more conversations about loan forgiveness in any one particular area. These ones certainly came to the top of the list when it came to priorities in terms of delivering services to the people of Saskatchewan, but they don't foreclose any further conversations.
And are you aware if this is part of the, Health Human Resources plan by your government in terms of, evaluating further expansion of loan forgiveness? Is that something under consideration through that avenue?
There will always be conversations and consideration by the ministers of health with respect to how to best support the delivery of health care in this province within the context of the Health Human Resources Action Plan. So there's always those conversations as to how best we can deliver those services. And if this ends up being part of that in the future, then certainly something that would be considered.
I wanted to come back a little bit to, discussion around international students. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding from your previous comments was that, the expectation is that institutions will look at, sort of new, expanded opportunities for revenue generation. And is, an increased recruitment of international students one of those measures that is being promoted as a revenue generator for institutions?
Yes.
And so how are we going about recruiting international students? We see news about certain missions to one country or another. What is the process for, that type of recruitment?
As I mentioned, we have an international engagement strategy, which is kind of built around two pillars, global engagement and capacity building and leadership. So one of the key factors is to ensure safety and security of post-secondary students, both domestic and internationally. But what we want to do is we want to encourage international students to come to Saskatchewan to train and hopefully stay in Saskatchewan to continue to support the economy. But we work with agents to recruit international students, and the government of Saskatchewan and post-secondary institutions attend a number of fairs, a number of in-person and a number of virtual sessions to showcase what we have to offer in Saskatchewan in terms of our post-secondary institutions and provide information to students that may want to travel and study here.
Okay, so do you have any specific any specific things that you offer to encourage retention of international students as graduates. Again, mentioning that after 5 years of graduation, 53% of international students in Saskatchewan leave the province.
In terms of the initiatives we have underway to support our international students and make sure that they are receiving the education and the supports they need, we recently launched a new provincial international education strategy, as the minister mentioned, which aims to create equitable and responsive, transparent, and a collaborative approach in terms of the recruitment of students in our province. There's a process across the post-secondary sector to allow the sector to share best practices and address any barriers to international students. One of the key programs in our strategy is we have a Saskatchewan Agent Training Program. This program is one of its first of its kind in Canada, and under this program, we aim to ensure students receive high-quality service from the agents that they are engaging with. To do this, we provide them with consistent and appropriate Saskatchewan-based instruction and resources to meet the needs and to answer the questions of the students. Through this program, the agents improve their knowledge of the Canadian laws and immigration, as well as benefits of studying and living and working in Saskatchewan. We've trained over 112 international recruitment agents, with more to come in 2023. This program is frequently cited by other jurisdictions as a leading practice for protecting the integrity of the international student program. In addition to this agent training program, we have designated learning institutions in Saskatchewan, which offer a variety of settlement and student supports to international students under this program in this framework. It should also be noted that each province has their own designated framework. Saskatchewan's framework is premised on ensuring that students have what they need to get the best possible learning and experience in Saskatchewan.
Okay, thanks. And what has the spending been to date on the international engagement strategy?
So the total budget for our international engagement strategy is $880,000. I would point out that that is in addition to any funds that our institutions spend on international engagement and student recruitment, which is not insignificant either. So working together with our post-secondary institution partners to ensure the success of that strategy.
Okay. And so you had mentioned, Deputy Minister, the agent training program, and how much money has been spent on that program?
The agent training year in the first year was $70,000.
7?
70.
Okay. So my colleague has joined, Vicki Mowat, our official opposition critic for health. And I'm going to turn it over to Vicki at this point to ask some questions around health profession training seats.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the minister and officials as well. I was asking some of these questions with the health minister, and he advised me that I was barking up the wrong tree. So I've got some questions. So I've got some questions here, folks, and yeah, would appreciate some of your thoughts here. As we look at the, I did listen to the opening remarks as well. As we look at the Saskatchewan healthcare training expansion, I know some of these details were released back in January in terms of the 18 different health organizations and 550 new training seats. But there is some additional detail that folks are seeking on this. In particular, at the bottom of that release, there's an indication that most of the new seats will be available in the fall of 2023. The remaining seats will be available as instructor facility equipment capacity is determined and as interprovincial agreements are finalized. So can you indicate which ones are the outliers or which ones we're still waiting on being finalized?
The question for you, Assistant Deputy Minister. Thanks, Mark.
Your question was how many of the seats we expect to have available as of the fall, and I'll answer that and also share how many we expect to have available by the end of the first institution or post-secondary year. So of the roughly 550 seats across 18 programs, we expect that 401 seats will be available by the end of the 22-23 academic year. So that's roughly taking you through most of the seats. Some of the exceptions that will be coming on board through the course of the reason that they may not be available at for the September fall semester is that the colleges and Sask Poly have different intake periods, so they may have some of those new seats may come on board for a January start. The regional colleges also have different intake points throughout the year, so we do expect that that as we have both the start of most of those seats coming on board in the fall, there will be some additional seats taking us up to 401, as I said, by the end of the 23-24 academic year. The other reason that some of these seats won't be available in the fall semester is that they are being extended over, introduced over a period of years. And so, for example, the clinical psychology programs at the University of Regina, University of Saskatchewan, those are being introduced over a number of years, and it will be a gradual rollout over the course of I think in some cases 5 years.
Okay. Are we able to go through occupation by occupation and get a sense of when these seats will be made available, or what seats will be available starting in the fall? So if we can kind of just, I don't know if you have the chart in front of you, I can list them one by one if that's preferable, but.
Sure, we do that. We do have that information available.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second to find the right table. So just moving through the number of seats that we expect to be available during the 23-24 academic year. Of the continuing care assistant seats, we expect 181 seats will be available. The licensed practical nurse, Indigenous practical nurse programs, 60 seats to be available. Medical lab assistant, 5 seats. Mental health and addictions counselor, 16 seats. Pharmacy technician, 24 seats. Physical therapy, 15 seats. And primary care paramedic, 100 seats. There are 2 programs with respect to the medical laboratory technologist and medical radiology technologist. There was a planned expansion, or there is a planned expansion of 40 seats between those 2 programs. We will be bringing on 20 of those 40 seats in the fall. They will be introduced in Saskatoon, and the other 20 seats we are intending will follow in the 2024. As I mentioned, the clinical psychology programs at the University of Regina and University of Saskatchewan, they'll begin their expansions with 6 new seats and will grow to the full expansion of 15 additional seats with increases over multiple years. The other area is with respect to the interprovincial agreements, the out-of-province seats that we announced at the time, and so we do intend to have 88 seats available. While we haven't finalized all of those agreements at this point, our intention is that we will have approximately 88 seats available through those programs.
Can you clarify whether the number, so you're referring to the net change in seats? So for example, like the backgrounder I'm looking at from January 2023 says for CCAs, the current seats is 613, and then the post-expansion seats is 794. So you had said 181 will be available, so that's the entirety of that.
We do expect, so yeah, 600, I just check these numbers, 613 is the pre-expansion number. We expect to get to 794 for an increase of 181. And we do expect that, again, CCAs are one of those programs that are offered through the regional colleges, and so some of those intakes may not all be for September of 2023, but as those different intakes come into effect over the course of the academic year, we do expect that the full 181 will be available.
By the end of 23-24 is what you had indicated, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I wonder if this can be reported more simply in a way that sort of compares to the chart that we have in front of us. So out of the 794 post-expansion seats for CCAs, how many of those will be available by the end of 23-24? If we can look at each category under that lens, it will prevent a lot of fervent math.
I think we can probably work through that. Just the form that the form that my information is. It presents the number of expanded seats in each area, and I also have the size of the increase, so we can probably identify where some of the exceptions are.
Perhaps if it's simpler, we can just get that information tabled so that we can do a cross comparator later. Or we can go through occupation by occupation. I'm pleased to do that as well.
I can move through the areas if you'd like, and just reference that. I think I can reference the total number of seat expansion and the number of seats that we expect will be available this year. So continuing care assistant, I think we covered. We expect 181 seat expansion. All 181 seat of those seats will be available in the 23-24 academic year. Licensed practical nurse and Indigenous practical nurses, the increase there is 60. It should be 100% of those available. Medical lab assistant, the increase there is 5, and we do expect all of those to be available. Mental health and addictions counselor, just finding that one. The expansion there is 16, and again, should be all 16 of those seats. Pharmacy technician, 24. Once again, all of those seats will be available. Physical therapist, 15 seats, all will be available. Primary care paramedic, 100 seats, all will be available during the 23-24 year. Medical lab technologist and medical radiology technologist. Of the 20 seats in MLT, we expect 12 will be added, and of the 20 seats in MRT, we expect 8 will be added in the fall. So there is a shortfall there. Clinical psychology, there's a total of 30 seats that are being added in clinical psychology, and 6 of those will be added this year as part of a multi-year rollout. With respect to interprovincial agreements, the diagnostic medical sonographer, we have 16 seats in total, and 8 of those will be added in 23-24. Electroneurophysiology, 3 seats are being added, and all 3 should be, we expect to be available. And I should just again mention, with respect to some of these interprovincial agreements, we're in the works of signing those agreements with some of the provinces and institutions that we're working with. So these haven't been finalized, and so, but just to give you a sense of what we are anticipating to come from those. The MRI, medical magnetic resonance imaging technologists, 9 seats in total, 5 in 23-24. Occupational therapists, 10 seats in total, 5 in 23-24. Respiratory therapist, 10 seats in total. At this point, we're looking at 2 being available in 23-24. Environmental public health inspector, we expect to have 4 seats will be available. And speech language pathology, 35 seats is the total expansion target, and 15 would be available in 23-24. I think that covers most all of them.
I think cardiovascular perfusionist.
One of one.
Thank you for going through that detail and saving everyone from me doing math on the spot. I'm interested in the 150 nursing seats that were announced last year. How many of these additional seats have been created? Can you take me through what the previous number of seats looked like, what the current number of seats look like, as well as their regional distribution?
So, of those seats, all of them have been created, and the number of nursing seats was divided evenly between the University of Saskatchewan USask program and the collaborative Sask Poly University of Regina program. That number was 62. There were so there were 62 RN seats added in each of those programs. There were also 5 nurse practitioner seats added at each of the USask and the collaborative U of R and Poly program. And we also have Sask Polytech adding 16 RPN seats, so that should get you to the 150. And just to note that there was an additional 8 RPN seats that were brokered by Northwest College in in fall of 2022.
And out of these seats that have been created, are all of these positions filled by students, or what are the vacancy rates? Also, I had asked about site specific, if you have that information.
Of the 150 seats, all were filled with the exception of 12 that were offered, but were not filled, and those were in the University of Saskatchewan post-degree Bachelor of Science program. We recognize that with the announcement of the new seats, that there may be some challenges fully filling all of the seats, across the board. We were pleased that most all of the seats were filled, but there were some in that post-degree program at the U of S that did not go filled in the first year they were offered.
Do you have a sense of why these seats weren't filled? And is there any indication that they will be filled for the upcoming class?
Some of the reasons were, one of the things that was noted is that in the first year of other program expansions, there have been other situations where all of the seats were not filled in the first year, and just really an adjustment period. With that particular program, it is a program, the U of S program, you're not drawing from the entire student population or high school student population. You are drawing from students who are already in their first year of an undergraduate health sciences program targeted towards health science professions. So you are pulling from a limited pool of potential candidates, and so it really, I think it was identified that a combination of just the timing and the ability to recruit into those seats, to create the awareness and marketing, as well as just recognizing that there's a more limited population through that U of S program than the U of R Sask Poly program, where it's available to the full full range of high school graduates and other students who may be either transferring into a different program or studying in it, or maybe haven't entered post-secondary at that point. There is some limitations around who is accepted into that program, and that's one thing that we're addressing in all of these, with all of the seat expansions, is that we've been doing a lot of advertising and marketing about the new seats that we've been adding through this year. A lot of emphasis on social media to really try and create the awareness about the availability of the seats that we've been adding through this year.
Can you take us through the number of seats per training site? I know there was a large emphasis on sort of decentralizing some of the nursing training. So can you take us through that breakdown?
So with respect to the 150 nursing seats, 62 of them that are being offered through the University of Saskatchewan RN seats. Those will all be in Saskatoon. Of the U of R Sask Polytech RN seats, 52 will be located in Regina and 10 in Saskatoon. The nurse practitioner program through the U of S, 5 will be offered online, and similarly, the U of R nurse practitioner, 5 will be offered online. And lastly, the Sask Polytech RPN programs, those 16 seats will be offered in Saskatoon.
So I'm confused because I thought that there was an expansion of seats in places such as Lloydminster. I can't remember listing all of them, but sort of only listed Saskatoon, Regina, and online.
So there are RN training programs offered in multiple different communities, and so we have seats delivered in Saskatoon, Lloydminster, Prince Albert, Yorkton, La Ronge, and Isle La Crosse, and those are through the U of S program, which does have has taken more of a regional approach, and the U of R program, U of R Sask Poly program is offered in Regina and Saskatoon. Those would be existing seats that are offered in those communities. The expansions that were part of the 150, those were based on the locations that I just provided.
And out of those existing seats that are distributed regionally, were there vacancies in those seats, or were all of those seats filled?
We know that there were some of the seats offered through the University of Saskatchewan outside of Saskatoon in some of the training locations outside of Saskatoon that weren't filled. We understand it was a small number relative to the overall program enrollment, but we don't have that number available right now.
Okay, I hope if it's feasible that information can be provided to the committee at a later time. I'm being told I get one more question here due to time. In terms of, like, it's certainly encouraging to see robust seat expansion in health occupations. I think we can all agree that training is a key component of the health human resources. How are these number of seats that are required determined? What sort of needs assessment takes place between yourselves, between the Ministry of Health, the relevant educational institutions, to forecast into the future of what's going to be needed, not only today, but also in the years down the road?
This is a kind of a collaborative effort between our ministry and the ministry of the two ministers of health and their administration to determine kind of where the greatest needs are, what the capacity of our institutions are, and so this is really kind of an ongoing discussion between the three ministries to determine where the greatest needs are. And again, capacity of institutions is important, and we do some work with regard to ensuring that the institutions have the capacity to provide it. But it's really a collaborative effort between all ministries in order to provide that.
Thank you, Minister. Having reached our agreed-upon time for consideration of these estimates, we will now adjourn for our consideration of the estimates and supplementary estimates number 2 for the Ministry of Advanced Education. Minister Wyant, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Just to you, Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for your leadership today. I want to thank members of the committee for their attention. I want to thank all my officials for being here today to support me in this important work, my Chief of Staff who is here. I want to thank Ms. Mowat and Ms. Bowes for the respectful questions this evening, and to thank Hansard for their very good work as well. So thank you very much.
Minister and Ms. Bowes, do you have any closing comments you'd like to make?
Yeah, just briefly, thanks for the conversation, Minister. This is our first time together in committee, and it's been interesting. Thanks very much to your officials. Really appreciate all the time and hard work that goes into prepping for estimates every year. And also want to say thanks to Hansard for your good work, and it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bowes. This committee will now recess until 6:15 p.m.